Okay, good afternoon once more, everyone, and welcome to our space this afternoon. We are going to be starting, by the way, and Ifwa is going to be our host for today. And I think all the speakers are in, so just stay tuned and listen to us. And at the end of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting, you'll be given the opportunity to contribute or ask your questions. So we'll start right away with our moderator. So you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Minute. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. And we are excited about today. It's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we are so happy to host the space here today for us to abreast ourselves on what disaster risk is actually about, what we are doing in Ghana about it, and how young people, as we are, can take advantage of the space and be very meaningful in it. So I think that's basically why we are here today, and also to celebrate some people, some very little actions that we are doing here and there to help build the resilience of our communities against disasters. Okay, so it's UNESCO's Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. So some people will ask, what is disaster risk? And what even is disaster risk management? So we know there are hazards. We can have natural hazards, we can have human-induced hazards. But in all, those hazards are prone to may have caused losses on life, health risk, and all other things. But the power of hazards to cause all those things is dependent on some very key things like our vulnerability, our exposure, and our ability to bounce back. That's our resilience. So all this will influence how we will cope with a disaster or a hazard. So when we talk about disaster risk reduction, we are talking about how we can reduce our exposure, we can reduce our vulnerability, we can enhance our coping mechanisms so that when such disasters strike our communities, we are able to either fight back quickly or have mechanisms in place that reduces the impact it poses on us. So that's what we are celebrating today. We know communities are doing diverse things to help reduce their exposure to such disasters. So that's what we are talking about today. We are coming to get abreast on such issues, learn about it, and see what we can do in our small spaces to make a difference as well and help save lives. Because when such disasters pose on our corridors, we know either people had and invest are gone in just a twinkle of an eye, or lives are lost, and we cannot bring back anyone from the dead. So it's better we are more proactive than being responsive as we are. We don't wait for floods to take all our stuff, then we decide to clean our gutters. Get it? We have to be more proactive and get measures in place to manage the risks that we have before those disasters come in. So that is what we are aiming to do today. And moving straight in, we have a panel that will be discussing very key questions. We want their input and how we can go about it. If you're a young person looking at getting invested or charting a career path in disaster risk reduction, the things you should know. I come to just have a bit of discussion around this side. Right. Let me just zoom in and welcome my speakers. So I have my first speaker is the research manager, sorry, of the Green, okay, officer, sorry, of the Green Africa Youth Organization. He's in the person of Paul Dankwa. He will give us a short bio of himself, but let's just welcome him. I don't know whether you snap or clap your hands, but Paul, you're welcome to today's session.
Sorry for the echo. Thank you very much, Mami. For I'm happy to be with all of you and share ideas and thoughts on the subject, and to also share the panel with my colleague Ines.
Guys, sorry, there's some echo, so he's just settling it. He will continue shortly. But as he's getting ready, I would want to invite my second speaker, who is in the person of Ernest Ofori. He's the Capacity Building and Education Officer of the Youth Climate Council Ghana. Hi, Ernest. You are welcome to today's session, and we are very excited to have you here.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Hi, Ifa. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very delighted to be here today to share my bits with you. I am looking forward to a fruitful conversation and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Hi, Paul. Please, you can go ahead and just give us your introduction. You couldn't finish.
Right. Thank you very much, Mamia, for and as I earlier said, I'm glad to meet you all and to share ideas on the subject of disaster risk reduction. So, as she rightly said, I'm the research officer at Gaio. As a research officer, my work intertwined between the various aspects of Gaio's thematic areas. That is climate change, disaster risk reduction, of which we're going to have a discussion on today, and then circular economy. So, I hope to share more insight on the topic, and I believe that I'm going to give a lot of insight, and I'm happy to also share the panel with my colleague Ernest, who is also well versed in the subject. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited already. Ernest, you want to give us a brief bio of yourself before we just get started?
A brief bio. My name is Ernesto, and I'm the Capacity Building and Education Officer for the Youth Climate Council. Um, I, I champion the youth climate movement, being the number one usher that helps with movement of the various youth climate movement in Ghana. So when I say the youth climate movement, it encompasses the climate advocates, the NGOs, the CBOs, all the actors of climate environmental sustainability. So I'm in charge with reaching out to them and finding from them what capacity gaps are there and how we can step up in terms of capacity building and building ourselves, making us inclined with what we do, so that we step up when it comes to creating innovative way in solving environmental and climate crisis. So that's what basically I do. If I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But please, you be on hold for me. Just relax after this brief introduction. I think I have quite a number of people here. I would really want us to also introduce ourselves, what we do, our expectations, to make this session a very interactive one. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ifeanyi Apia. I work with the Youth Climate Council Ghana. I'm the policy and research officer of the council, and I'm very glad to be your host and moderator for this session. I'll pass it on to Dean to give a quick introduction of himself, then you can pass it on as such. Okay, so Dean, can we hear from you? If Dean is not available, Minute, can you please introduce yourself and pass it on to someone else?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Minen Pongwe. I am the Climate Communications and Outreach Officer. I work with my senior colleague, Dean. I think he's quite busy with some technical stuff, but he'll join us soon.
Can you pass it to someone else?
All right, I'll have to invite them to become speakers because I can see some of our colleagues. Our HR is in. Lydia.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
Lydia
then
is.
that's fine. That's fine. I can just see all of you. We can't invite everyone before you speak,
Yeah.
but I can see Kabute. I can see Lydia, who is in here as Laraba. I can see Daniel. I can see Edith. I can see Imam, who started with us from he was very early, very prompt. I can see Maswell. I can see Nana Yao. I can see all of us. All of us.
Yeah, Kingsley is in as well.
Great, great.
Yeah.
We are all welcome. We are all welcome, and we are glad to have you here to share in this um, today's space on International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. We are very excited to have you on board. You are all welcome once again, and we wish all your expectations will be met. Thank you. Right, so now back to my panelists, Paul and Ernest. Great. Can you I'll just start with you. What is it with disaster risk reduction? Why is it important? I would want to hear from both of you just briefly. Why should we consider or be pushing for disaster risk reduction? Why is it eminent? And I'll take Paul first.
All right. Thank you very much, Priscilla. Before we talk about disaster reduction, I think it is very important that we contextualize disaster, what disaster is. I think that in the Ghanaian context, mostly when we talk about disaster, our mind falls on natural disasters like earthquake, flooding, and then other forms of disasters that occur naturally or natural induced risk outcomes. But when we consider disasters in a general sense, it is multifaceted, and the underlying factors behind them are quite intricate. Because when we consider disasters, we are not just looking at what occurs naturally. We could have social disasters, we could have technological disasters, we could have cultural disaster, we could have economic disaster. And thankfully, today, our lesson did not actually, or our discussion has not actually contextualized it to only natural disasters, but in general. But I think that natural sense, if you are talking about disaster risk, we are looking at how do we prevent disaster from occurring, the potential of a disaster occurring. Initially, before the Sendai framework that sets out proposals to reduce disaster risks from 2015 to 2030, we only had disaster risk management. That is, after the disaster had occurred, we come up with a reactionary method to manage what has already happened. For example, in Ghana, in those days, whenever there was flooding, they just don't know what to do. Ghana Meteorological Agency does not forecast the occurrence of the heavy rainfall. So before you realize there is flooding and people lose their lives, and government have to send in relief agencies and officers to come and mitigate what has occurred already. So afterwards, they set up the NADMO to ensure that instead of being reactionary to the risk of disasters occurring, we need to be proactive and ensure that such problems do not occur. So, disaster risk reduction, in its essence, is trying to prevent the disaster, the potential for disaster occurring, even before it has occurred. I'll pass it on to my colleague Ernest to throw more light on it.
Great. So, Ernest, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mami, and thank you, Paul. That was an amazing submission. So you were talking about the essence. Why is disaster risk reduction an important subject? Why do we need to talk about it? Paul has talked about how multifaceted the whole discourse is, and he's talked about the structures and some of the few agencies that we have in Ghana that are enabled or capacitated for these kind of um, event to handle these kind of events. It's very important. Yes, just as Paul said, we don't look at when an event happens, but we also look at trying to prevent a disaster from happening. Because if you look at the whole concept of the DRR, which is disaster and risk reduction or disaster risk reduction, we are looking at reducing the risk. But in as much as we are reducing the risk, then we are looking at stopping potential disasters that could happen. So the whole concept and practice aims to reduce the impact of disasters on individual. Let me just paint a small picture and get what I'm saying. Just recently, there was a spillage. The dam is full, so they needed to open the valve for the excesses to leave the dam, and certain communities, small communities around the Akosombo area was flooded. And these are disaster. The risk is that if it's yielded flood and the whole place, people has lost lives and all those things. Should we wait till people lose life and properties lost and damaged before we address the issue, or we anticipate a risk and try and find means and measures to curb the issue at hand or at potential hand before the actual occurrence? So that is why this subject is very important. A little statistics. When this issue happened, they said over 200 households are destroyed. So we are looking at 200 people living on the street overnight. And they said when the whole impact started, when they opened the valve and the overflow started coming out and the place was flooded, there was one side of the town, the neighboring town. Now it moved to the other side. So you could see that loss and damage keeps on multiplying here and there. That's why this subject is very important that we talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So you made us understand that disaster is not just naturally caused. The hazards that can induce disasters are not just naturally induced. We have ones that can be man-made, anthropogenic in nature. And though we cannot fully eliminate disasters, we can prepare towards it. That's why we have to be proactive than reactive. Prepare towards the early warning systems to help us well prepare for the disasters, for the hazards, and then enable our coping mechanisms so that they don't become disasters that will cause loss of lives and properties. So that's why we are here today. I'm very happy for your submissions, and I know we've started learning a lot on disaster risk reduction. But Paul, you were talking on the Sendai framework and whatever is in it. I know Ghana, we've been signing to multiple frameworks and international protocols and all that. So I want to know what Ghana stands and when it comes to disaster risk. What is Ghana stand when it comes to disaster risk reduction? Narrowing it down to specific national projects and policies on disaster risk reduction. Do we have something like that? Is Ghana doing something like that that we can all, because we all know that, oh, we all say that NADMO waits for flood to happen, then they'll come and give us relief support. But is there anything like that that Ghana is actually championing as in play to help reduce disaster? I would want to know as a research officer, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Priscilla. When it comes to the issue of disaster risk reduction, I think that, as always, Ghana has some of the best responses to it in terms of policy, right? I wouldn't say it in terms of technology, infrastructure, or planning, but policy. And before I do that, let me give a preamble. In Ghana here, and before that, when we talk about disaster, as I was saying earlier on, it comes across in different sectors of life. For instance, food security, there's a risk of disaster from there. Health wise, there's a risk of disaster from there. Natural resources, there's a risk of disaster from there. Housing, communications, even technology, there's risk of disaster from that. And I think something that Ghanaians don't know is that there are so many things that we are working on that is in its essence preventing the risk of disaster, but we don't know about it. For instance, let's consider the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. They have a lot of policies, and their objectives are focused on items that prevent the occurrence of disaster. For instance, the Ministry of Food and Agriculture have policies that has the objectives of food security and emergency preparedness. This is a way of preventing disaster risks. We also have another policy that promotes seed and planting material development. There are so many of them at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. When we go to the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and Innovations, they have policies that enhance capacity to adapt to climate change impact. And we know that several disasters that occur, especially in Ghana here, are climate induced. So if somebody has come up with a policy to enhance capacity to adapt to climate change impact, that means that the person is in a way fighting the potential of a disaster occurring. We also have policies that strengthen institutional and regulatory framework for management of natural resources. And also, once again, we need to understand that the impact of disaster is some of them have a snowball effect. One impact here could lead to another. For example, in the case of conflict, you could find out that just like NS cited example of just last week, the spillage from the Akosomo Dam destroying some homes. What if this leads to social unrest? Realize that there could be conflict. What is the underlying factor of the conflict? Because of a disaster from the dam. If it could have been prevented, the conflict wouldn't have occurred in the first place. So some of these government policies and government agencies target specific areas that, when you consider all together, in a way, is fighting the potential of a disaster occurring. When you go to the Ministry of Works and Housing, they enhance capacity to mitigate the impact of natural disaster, risk, and vulnerability. That is one of their policies. They also have another policy on flood control. They also have policies that target framework to coordinate human settlement development. And you might be aware, due to the recent occurrence of floods in areas like Accra and Kumasi, and we all know that settlements play a key role in such events occurring. So these policies are targeted at ensuring that these settlements in the first place is not a cause of these flash floods that is occurring. So in terms of government wise, there is a lot of policy in place to ensure that the country is well prepared against the occurrence of 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 of, of disasters. But where I have problem with is with the issue of technology and coordination. You realize that sometimes there are some disasters that are hard to prevent. For instance, those that are due to heavy rainfall. There are huge masses of cloud forming in the cloud. What technology do you have to prevent that? You can't, but you have to leave it to rain, and people are going to be affected. If you have a lot of technology like rescue systems, institutional frameworks that have the capacity to ensure that people are evacuated before these events occur, then the risk of the impact of this disaster could be reduced. But that is something that is lacking in Ghana here. For instance, there's going to be heavy rainfall. Ghana Meteorological Agency, they will just tell you there is a 50-50 chance that it's going to rain. And when you hear 50-50, you know that this is definitely not going to happen either way, or the person giving information is not accurate on what he or she is saying. So I think that technology-wise, we are lacking in that area, and also coordination between government institutions, where this one controls this one has to be on the ground. We don't actually see that. For example, in all cases of disasters occurring, especially in the case of flood, you always realize that in Ghana, and especially in Accra here, in the months of June, July, we expect flooding. And if you are somebody, you don't need to be even educated to know that there is going to be a flood in that period every year. But what do we do to prevent that? We don't do anything. We don't give proper forecasting. We don't give proper warning systems. We don't have institutional setups that are actually working on the grounds to ensure that these things are well mitigated. And that is the issue that we have as a country in the case of Ghana, if I've contextualized it very well. In terms of policy and what is on paper, we are great. And it's not only disaster risk reduction in all aspects. We all know that Ghana is great in that area, but getting the job done itself is the issue that we are having. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Getting the job done is where we have a problem. So, Paul has highlighted that we have sweet, nice policies in place for us to be able to reduce disasters, but then the actions to do that. Um, Ernest, still on that. I don't know if you, in your case, would know about specific projects that are in place that is working towards reducing disasters in Ghana or helping some communities building. Like, do you know of such? Like, you could share with us, Ernest.
Yeah, thank you, Amifa. That was an amazing submission, Paul. So, I mean, in Ghana, we all know, if you're looking at one of the potent countries with amazing policies in the world, Ghana cannot be overwritten, cannot be overlooked. A typical example is the ITMOS, right? If you know about it. Typical example is the Internationally Transferred Mitigations Outcome, which is a mechanism under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. It requires or allow countries to trade what we call the trade. There are only 3 countries in the world that are very active and has implemented these policies: Ghana, Switzerland, and Vanuatu. These things are things that countries will not pay attention to. But Ghana, we have good policy systems to deal with these operations. So when it comes to policy in Ghana, there is no problem because we always have the men in Akufo-Addo's voice. But the problem is one, implementation and enforcing those policies. There are a good number of policies. Trust me, I'll be with them. There are a good number of policies. We have the National Disaster Preparedness Baseline Assessment. So the government of Ghana, through the NACMO, that Paul talked about, who has the mandate to deal with disasters in Ghana, are undertaking a new project, which they call the National Disaster Preparedness Baseline Assessment. That is to help build its capacity as NADMO to reduce risk from multiple hazards. So the assessment actually includes a project, a new policy that they call Disaster Aware. Now, Disaster Aware, you can Google it. It's one word: Disaster Capital Aware. This is an initiative by PDC. And we all know PDC, Pacific Disaster Center. They are very much endowed. That setup is an institutional mechanical institutional framework under the University of Hawaii. So they are also like the UNFCCC sanctioning the IPCC, who are mandated to tell us what's the current happenings of climate change and what will happen in the future, so that governments, nations, and all that would, based on their predictions and their data, to make climate decision making. That is the same thing. UN has mandated PDC when it comes to research concerning disaster and risk reduction. So they've created and tested an initiative which they call the Disaster Aware. So through the National Disaster Preparedness Baseline Assessment, which the NADBO is actually starting or they've rolled out, they are going to use that one to determine where natural disasters could happen and find possible ways in reducing the risk it will come, because some of the risks are inevitable, just like Paul said, but we can't have a way in reducing that. So has invested in that, and that is going. That is not a problem, because that policy could be there, because this was implemented, it was spoken about 2 years ago, but we've not really seen anything about it. Maybe the media, or we are also not interested in conversation around this subject. We also have the disaster risk management country plan that has been there since 2008. So that one too aims to strengthen the country's capacity to manage disaster risk and reduce the impact of disaster on vulnerable communities. We also have the Ghana Plan of Action for DRR and climate change adaptation. As a way of finding those solutions in reducing the risk of disaster in Ghana, or managing disaster in Ghana. It forms an integral part of climate change adaptation. What is climate change adaptation? Building resilience to stand the various impacts of climate change. Rainfall, heavy rainfall, and all the other things that can be accounted as disaster in Ghana are things that are caused by climate change, which is the excess carbon in the atmosphere or excess emission of carbon or greenhouse gases. I say carbon because it's one of the potent gases that can spend a lot of years, over 1,000 years in the atmosphere. So some of these things, particularly the climate, when it comes to climate change adaptation, it plays an integral role in adapting or trying to reduce the impact or risk in disaster in Ghana. So a typical example is just the mangrove restoration, is planting of trees and all that, making sure that we have some of these reserves, particularly having these, how do I call it, spaces where excess water can absorb, wetlands, where these rains or floods can channel their way into the wetlands, will absorb the water so that they will not create a pathway into the community and destroy plants. These are adaptation programs or adaptations initiatives that we can also. So the natural disaster risk management country plan has an integral planning climate change. It actually deals with 7 things. I could just mention a few: disaster hazard mapping, education and awareness, institutional strengthening, and what's not. So we also have national disaster management plan. The list goes on and on and on. But the most important thing is that we enforcing these policies and making sure that we provide the logistics for whoever that is mandated to handle such situations, to equip them or enable them to stand up or stand in this job as required of them, because it would be very difficult if they are not and they are incapacitated in terms of logistics to stand up to their job. It would be very difficult for them to deliver as an entity. So these are some of the policies so far.
Thank you guys for that brilliant submission. You mentioned a few of such projects like the mangrove restorations that will help us reduce our impervious surfaces so that we have more surfaces to absorb water, to reduce flooding, and the policies aspect that we threw a lot of light on the fact that we need to implement this policy. But Ernest, you mentioned that the new rollout by NADMO, you don't know whether after talking about the initiative, whether they've been work on the ground on the issue that they've been talking about for 2 years. You don't know if there's been actual work on the ground. So this takes me to my next question actually. So as the capacity building officer of the Economic Council, can you talk about the education on the key issues as this to enhance capacity and build the knowledge of young people in this very important sector? It looks as if we are not following issues around disaster risk reduction. Maybe we've not seen it as one of the core, especially those of us in the climate space that we are fighting. We are looking for ways to fight the climate impact on our environment. It looks like disaster risk reduction has not been given a lot of attention. As you even said, you've heard that NADMO was doing this project, but you don't even know whether there've been work on the ground on what has been discussed. So I want to know what is being done for education to help build the interest and capacity of young people to actually follow disaster risk reduction projects in Ghana. Ernest.
Thank you so much, Okwa. So to become resilient to disaster risk has everything to do with illumination of this discourse, having illumination in the discourse, getting to understanding what the whole discourse or topic or subject is about. That means education. That means building a capacity and understanding in that thing. Let me tell you one thing. So there are these socio-cultural norms in Ghana, some that believe that certain natural disasters are not natural disasters. They are induced by their immoralities and misconduct in the society. So some people have that thought, they have that mindset. And such people, they can never attribute some of the things or the happenings, the natural disaster for that matter, in their communities to a natural disaster or to the sciences part of it. They would, based on their social cultural practice, which has become something that a precept from their predecessors to date. So it will be very difficult for those people to appreciate that subject. That's why education comes to play. Education plays a pivotal role, making people understand what the whole thing is so that they can really appreciate it. Just like I said, the disaster aware initiative is launched by the NADBO, and NADBO is rolling out in all regions by their officers to be trained to understand how to operate the system. I believe is an app and order. So to be able to understand and appreciate, they need to understand what it is, how it came about, and everything that we talk about starting with this conversation. So that is why I think capacity building and workshop on DRR is very essential, because that will help all appreciate the conversation from all angles. Whether you are belonging to the primitive ideology of culture or you are belonging to the sciences culture, you understand that there is a need for us to build resilience. What are we doing about it? At least it will cause somebody to think, to be innovative, whether or not you believe or do not believe in the sciences or do not believe in the cultural dispositions of the conversation. And also, there are a few things that I think we can also leverage and build a capacity, because see, if you do not get people to teach you how, you don't sit down without putting it on yourself to find out the truth or to find out information for yourself. They say if you want to see how incapacitated a black man is, you put them in a book, because they will not fish out the truth for themselves. They will not go on to read or research. There's a disaster resilience education for young people. It's a handbook that is very accessible on the internet, and it's high level. The various municipal MMDAs, the CBOs, the NGOs, and the various activists within the space to be able to voice these things out, so that people can reach out to these resources and educate themselves on the subject, so that we all come to an understanding. And it will be very easy if we have majority of the people understanding and pressing. And you'll be surprised that when a lot of people understand the discourse, they will rationalize into that thing and come out with an amazing solution that one person would probably not be able to do. So I think that when we are able to also have access to some of these things, or the various MMBAs and the various actors within the space are able to make these things happen, just like YCC does, capacity building, guy do all those things, we can reach out to the communities and be doing some of these things to help them appreciate the conversations around this discourse. And also there's another amazing document that we can all try and Google and search for that document or find that document. It's called the DRR Education Proof 2 document. So in the documents, they have fast games and activities, which are proven ways in making people comprehend things that are complex. And you know that this discourse or subject is very complex. It has a lot of technicalities and will bore people. But using those things and other mechanisms in education, it will shed light on them and it make it easy for people to appreciate the subject and also learn. So education is very paramount, and we all play roles in that. Today you are here on this space. This is Gaio's way in shedding light on the subject so that you here today would also understand the subject and be vocal when you are talking about it and understand what you are communicating, so that the other person will also propagate, so that the information will keep on following that pattern of to making us all appreciate the subject and rationalize and bring out amazing innovative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. Thank you, Ernest. And I will take this opportunity to thank Gaio for this space. At least you are hearing about disaster risk reduction if you've not already. And if not for anything, you are learning a bit about it, so you could go back to your space and actually build your own capacity in that regard. And if you want to champion a career in that domain, you could do that. Thank you very much, Ernest, once again. And I come to you, Paul. So disaster risk reduction is one of Gaio's things I know. Can you highlight what disaster risk reduction project Gaio is undertaking and the relevance of such projects for sustainable economic development here in Ghana, and even translating across Africa, as Gaio is an African brand? What is such projects doing for the entire region? I would want to know that. Paul, please.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ernest. I think that was amazing. Before I give submissions on what Gaio has been doing, I think it is important that we understand what contributes to activities adding up to disaster risk reduction. And from the United Nations Environment Program report, they indicated activities that contribute to disaster risk reduction as stipulated in the Sendai framework. We have one, understanding disaster risk; two, strengthening disaster risk government to manage disaster risk; three, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience; and then four, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response. So when you come to Green Africa Youth Organization, we have three thematic areas: climate change, circular economy, and disaster risk reduction. When you consider them holistically, you realize that whatever Gaio does is, in a way, a form of disaster risk reduction. For instance, I will come to the specifics, but in general, when you look at circular economy, we are trying to prevent the disposal of waste into the environment. When you dispose waste into the environment, example, plastic waste, they end up in gutters. And when they end up in gutters and it rains, this plastic waste chokes the gutters and thus leads to flash floods. And that is a disaster. So if you are preventing the disposal of these plastics into the environment, then in indirectly you're also preventing the risk of a disaster occurring. Let me put that aside. Let's go to the climate change arena. We have climate change programs, adaptation programs, mitigation programs, and we know that the leading cause of flooding and drought in Ghana and Africa is from climate change. So if you are doing something to contribute to the fight against climate change, then indirectly you're also contributing to disaster risk reduction. And then we have the disaster risk reduction thematic area itself under Gaio. So let me go deep into that and see some of the specific projects that Gaio has been doing. Under that, we have the water for adaptation project in northern Ghana, where and period poverty. That's the name of the project, water for adaptation and period poverty, where we are supporting rural communities in northeastern Ghana to adapt to climate change, where we support them with clean sanitary products and water resources. We also have trees for biodiversity, where we undertake tree planting exercises as well. When you come to the country as a whole, we are implementing the climate air fund, though it is not full operational, but it is something that we are what do you call it, advocating for, and we hope that in the near future, this is something that will come to fruition, and it's some of the ways that Gaio is contributing to it. And another major one, I know NS spoke of education and enlightenment. For the past 2 to 3 years, Gaio has been organizing quizzes on disaster risk reduction. I think it is this year and then last year or so that we couldn't host that programs. But we've been doing it, educating school children, senior high school students, and anybody who comes across the project about what disaster risk reduction is, so that we can all contribute to it. Because in Ghana, there is this phrase that they say, I hope I get it correct, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So ignorance of the risk of disaster is not an excuse. The fact that I don't know that doing this will expose you to a higher risk of disaster, the fact that you're ignorant of it doesn't mean that when you are exposed to it, it will not have an impact on you. So these are some of the major projects that Gaio has been doing to help the fight or contribute to disaster risk reduction activities. And I might say, I'll be candid with it, it is not something that within this year specifically that we have heralded this year, but for the past previous years and looking into the future, it is something that we are passionate about as an organization, and helping to ensure that people are aware of the risks that they face and the potential impact that they come with it. And in our own little way, we are making impact to ensure that people are aware of the problem. Now, the significance of this is that, especially in the case of Northern Ghana, where we have school girls staying at home, not going to school because they don't have proper sanitary materials and sanitary practices during their period times. So if people knows this and there is help, there is provision of amenities to curb these problems, it means that in a way we are contributing to girl child education in Ghana. And transcending this to of Africa, I think the issue of period poverty due to water scarcity, period poverty problems due to water scarcity is one of the major issues that affect adolescent schoolgirls and affect girl child education on the African continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. So if there could be an instrumental framework set up to ensure that girl child on the African continent is provided with the best social amenities during their period in the month, and not just that, there are adaptation measures to ensure that there is the fight against climate change on the African continent. I think some of the problems we'll be having now will not even occur.
Right.
And not only that, sorry about that, not only that, in Africa, we mostly hear of conflict. We hear of, for instance, in the Central African Republic, we have herdsmen fighting with soldiers. What is the reason for their fighting? It is because they want access of water for their cattle. What is the reason for that? Climate change. And that is a disaster. But if there are measures put in place, like planting more trees, ensuring that water catchment are protected, these issues will not occur. So ignorance of the risk of disasters, it is really dire. It is something that we cannot turn our eyes off on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And I love when you mentioned the things that we are doing that are indirectly reducing disaster risk in Ghana. Because climate risk is a heavy thing. Climate risk is directly when you have a community that is at risk because of their climate issues surrounding them. Any little hazard plus their vulnerability will scale into huge disasters in those communities. Can embed on a circular economy issues are climate thematic area to reduce such climate risk is very important way of reducing disasters in Ghana. Thank you very much, Paul, on that. But I like where you ended it at. So this sector has received very low attention in Ghana. I'm not saying it like, but I'm saying it. We don't really talk about disaster risk reduction in Ghana. So from young people, despite its importance, young people don't really know about it. So kindly highlight. I want to know what are the limitations, what is enabling us not learning about it, talking about it, what is the problem surrounding disaster risk reduction education in Ghana that is not making us forthcoming or young people interested in this discourse? Or is it that we don't know about it? Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mami. For when it comes to the issue of education on or knowledge on disaster risk reduction. Funny enough, everywhere in Ghana there is the risk of disaster occurring from north, south, east, west, and central. And in most cases, we are exposed to the disaster itself. We have issues of flash flooding. We have issues of drought up there in the north, pest infestations, and all of that. All of these are some of the disasters that we face on our daily routines. But the issue is about priorities. I think that as a country, as people, we haven't prioritized education or knowledge sharing on disaster risk very well. We haven't even invested into it ever. Because look at what we have the institutional setup. We only have NADMO. Whenever we are talking about disaster prevention, we only consider natural disasters, flooding, earthquakes, landslides, and all of that. But we haven't considered other types of disasters. I think that moving forward, the best way to, as a country, to address this issue is that one, there must be more research into innovations in on how to deal with these issues, and then also incorporating this into our education system. I know that recently the country is trying to incorporate climate change education into our national curriculum. And you know that climate change education is one of the ways of reducing disaster risk, right? So, aside from climate change alone, we should include other ones that create awareness on how to prevent this disaster. It could be easy as communal, what do you call it, sanitation education. When I was young, we used to have environmental studies. They said, do not urinate into water bodies, do not defecate anywhere, do not dump rubbish around. And if you consider it now, you realize that in those periods when we were being taught, do not dump rubbish around, at the end of the day, those rubbish, if you do it in reality, if you dump them around in reality, it ends up in gutters, leads to flooding. But when the days and the years pass by, they tend to take their eyes out and focus on other matters. So I think that one, there should be more investment into education on the, especially at the basic and middle level. There should be more research into innovations that can help us reduce the risk of disasters. And then also, government should make it a priority. It could be as easy as public education on national television stations, the importance of maintaining proper domestic sanitation at home, keeping the environment clean, community clean, letting people know that dumping refuse around could lead to flash floods as well as other stuff as well, and to also let people know and be aware of the actual impact of climate change. Because when we are looking at climate change, we are not just looking at drought and then what do you call it? That only. We are looking at disease outbreaks, and in Ghana we have this record of I've forgotten the exact name of these worms, four army worms. I think that's the name, infecting crops in the north. These animals are able to proliferate because of the impact of climate change, because of high temperatures and all of those stuff. So we need to get to the root of the matter and let people know that for us to develop, both economically, social-wise, cultural-wise. We need to understand that whatever we do as a people have impact, whether on the environment or anything that we do, and then highlight on some of the problems or the issues that we have been doing that is exacerbating this risk from disasters. I believe that when that awareness is created, in a sense, people will also be informed, well informed about what the problem is. And also, another one is enforcement. Just a couple of years ago, I was doing my internship in Achimota, and I happened to um, pass by this building that was in a waterway. And every year, year after year, the place was flooded. But yet still, the people living in that house were still living in the house because it's their family house and they built it. Meanwhile, every year it gets flooded. And whenever it gets flooded, they go to NADMO. NADMO tries to give them mattress and then other relief materials. But ask yourself, is mattress equivalent to the life that you lose should in case you are? So in such instance, and the building was in a waterway. So if they clear the building, the water will have a clear path to move on, and so that it will not get stagnated and flood other people's houses. So there should be proper enforcement measures put in place, both at the institutional level and then at the local level as well. So I believe that research, innovation, education, prioritization, and enforcement, these factors are very important to help us mitigate these risks from the disasters that we usually face or easily beset us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Like I was saying, when climate change became an issue and we started talking about it, we needed to keep talking about climate change every time, keep talking about it, education, advocacy. And now, at least, if not everybody, at least each one of us here has a fair knowledge on climate change and all that is about. So I think when we push that same energy into disaster risk reduction, which directly affects our livelihood and our lives, that one will also be very important for all of us. Thank you very much, Paul. And to Ernest, so looking at the responsive nature of Ghana towards disasters, with the young people and children mostly paying dearly for such occurrences, since we are the most active ones, such as flooding issues that we've been talking about, kindly indicate how young people can rise to the occasion and hold governments responsible while actively taking action to reduce such risk. Because Paul was saying that we need to enforce our laws. Buildings and waterways should be removed. How do we hold our government accountable? How do we push them to be very proactive than responsive? And let's can you take that?
Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you, Paul. Eva, please, if you would permit, I would like to share one more thing to what Paul Adam said with regards to the limitations that may be enabling, this. I just want to share one thing, and it's very alarming when I found or I got this information. Please, am I permitted to do that?
Yes, please.
But I'll make sure I do this briefly. So, one of the issues that is contributing or enabling the limitations is limited resources. Do you know that the fire service, let me just give you this statistics, it will blow your mind. So according to provisional estimate of 2021 population and housing census by the GSS, the Ghana Statistical Services, the Greater Accra region only has 2.1 million residential and non-residential houses. 2.1 million. This is as at 2021 statistics by the GSS. Only Greater Accra has 2.1 million. Now, you know the number of wood structures that are mounted every day in Accra. You know the number of buildings that are erected every month in Accra. Let's just say that up to 2023, we still have not even 2.1 million. We have 2 million residential and non-residential houses in Greater Accra. How many would have in Ghana? Let's just take Greater Accra as the base value. Fire stations and fire engines. Fire stations are the place where the fire service operates. So the fire stations houses the fire engines. The fire engines are the fire cars, the fire car that we see around, like the fire ambulance, quote unquote. They are called the fire engines. Do you know that the whole of Ghana, we have 75 fire engines? 75 fire engines in Ghana. It's shocking. We have 10 in Ashanti region, 5 in Bono Ahafo region, 7 in Central region, 8 in Eastern region, 12 in Greater Accra, 6 in Northern, 4 in Upper West, 3 in Upper, 4 in Upper East, 3 in Upper West, 9 in Volta, and 11 in Western region. I'm asking you, or let me ask yourself, 75. If we are looking at reducing disaster risk reduction, and fire service operates with NADMO in terms of managing disaster. When there is fire, when there is flood, these fire stations rush there, and we have 2 million houses in Ghana. Do the math and let's find the ratio of houses to a fire engine. See the problem.
Yes.
So I think that when we are investing a lot of energy in blasters, in tourism and which is generating a lot of buzz and talkability, the government should also look at some of these things. The fire engines, the fire station, equipping more and these entities that are designated for these operations. Thank you for. So I'll go on to my next submission.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we can do in Ghana is advocacy. Advocacy is what we are doing. Advocacy brought you and I here. Advocacy brought everyone on this call here because we want to hear, want to know more about it. We want to, from our own heart, born of passion, talk about this subject and generate the buzz around it. We want to make sure people who do not have the technical know-how or the knowledge concerning this topic get to know about it or get to hear about it and act accordingly so that it saves the planet. Advocacy is what Gaio is doing now. We are commemorating this day with a space so that we get to educate ourselves in order. So it's all starts in a lot of form. It could be public campaigns. You can take to your social media and be writing that because I mean, doing these things respectfully. You wouldn't go out being, blatantly ignorant and saying things that you do not know. Like I said, people might go out trashing out policies. There are policies in Ghana. So if you go out and do all these things, maybe you find yourself wanting by using right words, taking to your social media, talking about these things, generating buzzes around these things, signing, a lot of coming together as group, demonstrating and doing all those things. Imagine we demonstrated to occupy the Jubilee House. Imagine if the same energy is channeled towards mobilizing ourselves and taking to the streets of Accra, talking about disaster. Could you imagine how the whole feeling would be like? Now, let me ask you if today I say that I'm in the youth to go and do a campaign or go do a demonstration concerning non-enforcement of policy with regards to DRR. So I need people, green soldiers, to help me. You see the number of people that will show up. It is not an interested subject. So I think advocacy is one of the ways we can go about in doing this and holding the government responsible. Another thing is participation. In our education system, Paul talk about the curriculum and all. We practice the passive education system and not the active ones. The passive ones do not require students to ask questions beyond the book. You don't get to query your teacher as much as you can because you'll be labeled too known or you'll be labeled arrogant. When you want to know about the discourse, when you want to know what it is. Because see, knowing is what will take you to inventing. The act of racking your brains around something is having the baseline is having a knowledge in that particular thing. If you do not understand something, you cannot migrate or grow to the point where you can now rack your brains, create something to solve that issue you found ideas and solutions about. So I think participation is also one of the things that would also help. Imagine if we have a space where everybody will not see and ignore. Imagine, say, we want to sign a petition. When the government talked about and created an LI 2126, that enables them to mine in the forest reserve. Nobody knew about it. But when the environmental movement saw it, they started bringing out petitions and people were signing. How many people signed? Let's just not talk about the people that didn't know, but those that saw that skipped. How many people signed that petition? So it's participation. You don't see and pass. This is something that goes a long way to hurt us. So if we are looking at that, we are looking at bringing everything on board. When you see engage, when you see share, because the kind of people you have or the people you have within your space might not be the same people I have in my space. You may have the president's daughter in your mutual friendship or in your connections. When you shared it, it got to the president's daughter. The president's daughter got to show it to the president, and it follows that, circles. So participation is also very key. Education, Paul has talked about it. Now I'm just reversing it. It's very good that we get to educate ourselves, get to find out. It is not so wrong to ask. If you do not know anything about, when we were going to talk about this subject, I had to read into it. It's not that I went to school, acquired a degree in disaster risk. I haven't done anything like that. I'm speaking out of passion because I went to find out this information, read it, and decided to tell you. This is something that we can all do. Aside the workshops, NGOs are not doing the workshops. If you are waiting for government to do a commercial on that, he will not do, because Apart from those A's commercial, he never told me my mother will be married and what that commercial, the Accra commercial. We've not seen those things again. If you are waiting for those things, you wait till that kingdom come. So it's high time we also reach out, stretch ourselves a little, and find out information for ourselves. Do research. Aside the other NGOs who are also trying their small way, finding themselves to education and capacity building workshops and seminars of the subject DRM. Another thing is innovations. Innovations goes hand in hand with support, but let's just talk about innovations. Innovations might not necessarily demand money. Innovation is the ability of bringing something new into existence. What does the new thing do? It doesn't, and then it needs to solve a problem. So if I'm able to identify a problem and draw hypotheses, find methods in achieving them, and finally get to bring an amazing concept that solves the problem, some may not require anything. So even though funding makes innovation potent, innovation does not really drive on funding. You can think about an idea, bring it out, and help this issue something that we can all deal with. So, therefore, these are some of the things that we can do as individuals to help one make the subject on DRR very generate all the buzz and talkability it needs to generate, and also put the government to be doing the right thing that the youth demands from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Thank you very much. When you see you engage, when you see you share, let's keep this conversation running. Those that were not able to be here, you can just share something, a bit of a line or two that you learned from this, and share it, as he said, for us to keep engaging on this issue, for us to keep reaching out to other people that don't know about this, for them to also have an idea on it. Then that's how it goes. That's how we reach the policymakers. That's how we reach the people that make decisions for us. Thank you very much, Ernest, on this. I've been quiet for a while. We still have our speakers here with us. I would open the floor now. If you have questions, if you have inputs, please let's you. Everything is welcome here. It's a safe space there. So please, we are in for questions, inputs. If you are confused about anything, please, we are open for it. So let me know your questions. Let me know if you have inputs. Thank you.
Benezik, you have the floor. I saw your hand up.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, host. And I might say our speakers have done a very great job in tackling every aspect of disaster risk reduction. And even when the things I decided to talk about, I realized they have already touched on it very well. So I just want to make an input on this, a contribution, just touch on some key areas also as well. So when you look at the Sendai framework, the predecessor framework, which was the full framework for action, when you compare that to the Sendai framework that we have right now, you realize that they have made updates to the global targets, right? Keyword here will be the global, right? Global target. It is not surprising. I won't go into that because of time, but it's not surprising that you have the framework indicating that you the state or you the member state, you the country, you have the primary role to reduce your disaster risk, right? But you ask yourself, like Paul touched on, it seems not much is done here in our country, and even in the framework, you realize that it indicates that the responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, right? Including the local governments, including the private sector, including other stakeholders. But then it seems this becomes top level discussion even when there is a discussion on it, right? Even when there's a discussion on it. For the Sendai framework, it seems it covers almost every area. It's quite complete because it works hand in hand with other. No, this framework is from 2015 to 2030. 9 years gone, 6 years to go, right? But you ask yourself, what is the benefit to what are we showing as Ghana? I mean, what have we done? How are we using the framework to make sure that we reduce our disaster risk, right? So it works hand in hand with other 2030 agenda agreements, right? The Paris agreements that I'm sure you are aware of, the new urban agenda, and even the SDGs, right? But then when you look at the priorities of the framework itself, One which is understanding the disaster risk. That is why I am very much happy and glad about what we are doing right now, right? We are, it seems much is not on that in the country, right? Ernest mentioned, touched on an area that I really love. There are other aspects of our lives in the country where almost everybody is aware of and almost everybody is interested. It comes to this. How many people even know about this? How many people even know about something called disaster risk um, reduction? Right. So that's why something like this, these spaces are very I'm glad these spaces are there for us to keep on educating for the understanding, right? But the most, I'll say the most gravest issue here, or the pathetic issue here, is that even with the understanding, we go to priority two, which is strengthening disaster risk governance, right? To manage the disaster risk itself. How are we strengthening our governance to manage disaster risk? When there is that dam spillage, when there is those floods that we've been seeing in the country, when we have those explosions, those explosives, right? When those things happen, what is our governance, right? How are we strengthened enough, right, to even tackle, to make sure that for the major, or sometimes four major aspects or objectives of it when it comes to disaster risk management, that's the prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery. How are we being strengthened in those areas as a country, right? You go to priority three and then you look at investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. How are we even investing in that? When these disasters happening in the country, you look at NADMO, and even NADMO, they are not even resourced. Paul even mentioned something. There are floods, and then they'll now go and then give you mattresses, right? But that is mostly what NADMO does, and they are even handicapped in the first place. Where are the investment coming from? So it means it's something that the country in itself is not championing as it should, right? So I don't want my talk to be, to be long. But then it is good that my baseline address will be that organizations like Gaio and other organizations, we should be able to come together, right? Foster that collaboration to champion this agenda, to champion disaster risk reduction, right? It is in so doing, right, that we can actually put the government on its feet, right, on its toes, to be able to do something about it, whilst concurrently or parallelly, we are also doing something as NGOs or as organizations to help make sure that we achieve the targets of disaster risk reduction. So I'll just leave with just one question that I had there, so that the speakers can help with it. I mentioned that the Sendai framework states that their responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, right? So we have the local governments, the private sector, and other stakeholders. I just want to ask, I know the other stakeholders, NGOs, organizations are part. Are individuals part of the stakeholders? And what are we individuals, right, supposed to do? Do we have, what are the specific roles? Maybe they have mentioned it already, but I just probably want them to stress on it. The roles that individually we can play to make sure that we get to the objective of this agenda. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benedict. That was a long one, but thank you. It was really insightful. Thank you very much for the submission. And please, can we take those questions for Ernest?
Um, Thank you very much, Benedict, for the question. That was very insightful. Can you hear me?
Yes, Paul.
Okay, so there was this time I was passing by a construction site and they had the banner hoisted at the site and it stated, and I quote, "Safety begins with you." End of quote. So you realize that in mitigating disaster risk, it all depends on you, the individual that will be impacted by the disaster. As like indicated at the site, safety begins with we, the
I think his line is breaking.
Hello, Paul. Please, can you position yourself well?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know where I cut off, but I think I might have to begin from the
Safety
part.
begins with you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mami, for. So, in the fight against disaster risk, mitigating disaster risk, it all boils down to we, the ones who be impacted by the disaster itself. Imagine you are going to set up a home and you don't secure a building permit before you do it. The reason for securing a building permit is that experts will review your building plan and know that even where you are setting the building up, it's a safe place to do that. A lot of people don't do that in Ghana. Some people even get a permit after they had finished building the house. And I know that there's the issue of government institutions not being responsible and all that. I agree with that one too. But you have to understand that no one can live the life for us. If you want to reduce the risks of floods, reduce the risk of drought, reduce the risk of disease outbreak, reduce the risk of epidemics and all of that, it is all up to us as individuals. We have to make up our mind that we are the change makers. And so, even from our home, from our schools, from our offices, we are doing our very best to ensure that one, we don't produce waste, which will subsequently lead to more CO2s and methane being released into the environment. These are all measures that we must put in place. And I know that sometimes, or in all times, as Ernest rightly said, it boils down to education and awareness and sensitization. But in response to Benedict, your question, we are the main stakeholders in this whole risk reduction. It starts with us, and it should be borne by you.
Thank you, thank you. And as you have anything to add, else we go back to ask for our inputs and questions. Ernest.
Yeah, I'm a fan. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Benedict. That's an amazing question. So Paul has touched on that. I'm just going straight to the stakeholder thing and whether or not, because the framework actually talked about the collective, the government and the local government, and then the other stakeholders, which includes you and I. We are all stakeholders within the space. But you can tell me, you and I can tell that when you walk to a construction site, when they put the plan or they mount the plan in a giant billboard or a gigantic billboard, they allow experts in that field to pass comments before they begin construction. So they give a time period so that people will come and say, I know the end elevation or the right elevation needs to be tweaked, needs to be done this way. They talk about the technicalities. But before you can walk, you can actually walk to whoever owns the site plan and make that comment. You need to prove who you are. That is identification and track record. So in as much as you are an individual, you can't just walk to a government and make recommendations. At least we should see what you have done. We should see your footprint. We should see your impact. So as a collective or as an individual organization, yes, you can't be a stakeholder. We have seen that Desmond is part of water for adaptation. He's been on several boards. He's not going as an individual, but he actually went as an individual, but from an organization, representative of an organization that has track record. So if you want to be on part of this discussion, and of course you are doing something or you have something doing that we can trace and say, oh, this person has done this, so we should invite this person to the table. Other than that, everybody can just walk out and say, I'm a stakeholder, let me be on the board and let my voices be heard. You can channel that through your organizations. And if one person from your organization is represented, the entire organization is represented. That's why you have meetings to discuss what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernest. That is why, as young people, we have the Youth Climate Council Ghana to help channel your concerns to policymakers. Thank you. And please, we are still open for questions and comments. Minutes, are there any?
I haven't seen any contributions or questions because we're about. We'll be closing in 4 minutes.
But
If not,
as we wait for the questions, I would like us to just run up this for me. As young people here, we want opportunity, so we want special advice. Could highlight some opportunities in the disaster risk management sector for young people who are looking to champion a career path in that with that. Ernest, Paul, can you just highlight a few of such for us as we wait for questions from our listeners? Paul, please go first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Career path in disaster risk reduction. That question is vague because I think we need to split it down to the professional and then advocacy level as well as other stuff. So the professional, we have the scientific, that is those academic, let me put it that way, and then the engineering as well. So for someone, I presume that you mean somebody who is already out of school and wants to carve a career in disaster risk reduction, if I get you correct.
Yes, like people here, if someone just heard about disaster risk reduction but is pretty interested, what opportunities are available in that space for the person to take advantage of? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. just like in all aspects of life, climate and other stuff, to put it as innovations. What do you want to let people know about disaster risk reduction? Ernest earlier on was saying advocacy and all of that, but if you are somebody who has ideas, now you know what disaster risk reduction is. What can you do about it? Are you going to advocate? Are you coming up with an innovative idea to let people know more about disaster risk reduction? Or have you come up with a technology that is what do you call it? That is reducing our risk to disaster. So the opportunities are endless. It's a matter of do you want to contribute? That is it. Anything you can contribute is an opportunity for you. So I won't limit it to let's say seeking a job or just raising awareness. But whatever you want to contribute as an innovative idea, it could be just educating people, even in academics, getting a book down or learning materials. It could be Internet of Things. For instance, just this year we had the African Climate Innovations Challenge, and there was this team of young ladies who had developed an Internet of Things. It's a software slash hardware component that I think is yeah, it's mostly software that enables Google Earth users, Google Maps, sorry, users identify where there is flood and then prevent it. For instance, if you are using a route to a place and then there is a flash flood along the way, this software system will trigger you and let you know that there is a flood here. It's an innovation, and in a way, though it's an adaptive measure, but it is a way that they are contributing to it. So it's a matter of what you know now and what you want to contribute. That alone.
Right, right, right. Thank you very much, Paul. So I thank all of us here, and sorry, our time is almost done. All of us here at least learned something today. And happy International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. I'm so happy for us to have this interactive session, learn and know about our best to do in disaster risk reduction in Ghana to all towards the greater good of building the resilience of Ghana towards a sustainable economic development for all. Great, great. Thumbs up, Green Africa Youth Organization, for this brilliant idea. I'm very grateful for being your host today. I hope you've learned something. I hope you're going out there to champion the cause. I think you could just write something you learned from this session and just post it. Let's have an interactive section even after this and keep the conversation going. As Ernest said, when you see, you engage. When you see, you share. So you can also start something. I will see and I will engage and I will share it for you. Let's keep doing that. And I think we'll do an awesome thing at helping people to know about disaster risk reduction. Thank you all. Minette, if there's nothing else to talk about, we are very grateful for attending the session and have a good day. Minette, is there anything?
No, thank you. I just want to thank you for being a great host. Like, you hosted the space very well. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate our speakers as well, Ernest and Paul. We also want to thank Benedict for contributing, and we also just want to acknowledge the presence of all our staffs and my senior colleague that actually made today possible, Zin. We want to thank you all for joining and looking forward to next week. We also just want to let you all know that Gaio and YCC is actually organizing the Air Koi this year. So we are inviting you all to stay tuned, follow us on all our social media platforms to be updated on what is going to be happening on the 25th of this month. And if possible, tell a friend to tell a friend that Gaio is going to be organizing weekly spaces. That's maybe there are some weeks we might use LinkedIn, we might also use Instagram and other platforms. So just stay tuned for more educative programs. And if possible, today just tweet something and tag us, and we're going to reshare. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a blessed weekend.
Great, great. Let me add this one thing. And guys, the conference of parties that is called is coming up soon. So the Youth Economic Council Ghana, together with the Global Alliance, is organizing a trip to COP webinar series to get you abreast on what you should know before COP. So please join us next week. That is 20th Friday for the first session on a trip to COP. Thank you all. Do have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye, and thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. Okay.